Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Oxygen for the Soul. We're hoping this week's parasha is Parashat Mishpatim. It is the beginning of also Shkalim. It is Chodesh Adar, the month of happiness. We say Mishen Nichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. It's a time where we're supposed to increase our joy. Last week's parasha, we went through how God gave us the Torah. The 10 commandments are uttered. Our Chachamim tell us that the 10 commandments are not just 10 commandments, but those 10 commandments also encompass all 613 of the mitzvot, that each one of the mitzvot themselves each one of the 10 commandments are part of what we call the Av mitzvot, the head main titles of what the mitzvot are. And then you have something called the children, the toldot of those mitzvot as well. Okay, so Parasha begins ve'ele hamishpatim, and these are the ordinances. Okay, now the word ve'ele hamishpatim, and these are the ordinances. It's just at first glance you read this, it seems grammatically inappropriate to start a chapter with the with the conjunction and. Right? But nothing in the Torah is to be taken for granted. Every single letter, every single syllable, every punctuation mark is there to teach us something very profound. The conjunction and is there to remind us that this parasha is connected to the preceding one, right? What was the preceding one? We have the revelation, we have Matan Torah. And that's to teach us that even as the laws in the previous parasha were given at Har Sinai, the commandments pertaining to all the civil laws in this week's parasha, right, were also taught at Sinai. But wouldn't we understand that on our own? Do we really need to have this word ve'ela to remind us that all the Torah commandments come from Sinai? Isn't it? What do we need it for? And the answer is, yeah, sadly, unfortunately, we need to be reminded. Now, most of us have a tendency to rationalize all sorts of, regulations in the Torah. We come up with all kinds of these weird ideas of creating rationalizing arguments, rationalizing regulations that deal with all kinds of our interpersonal relationships and so on and so forth. You know why? Because ultimately, at the crux of the rationalization is, it's my life. I do what I want to do. Right? I'm the one in command. I choose how this game works. I'll make that decision. And that's the argument we make. We determine what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. The Torah, however, reminds us that it is only the one who created the world who can make that kind of a determination. Only God can decide what is honest and what is dishonest, what is kind and what is cruel, what is moral, what is immoral. And precisely because of that, the Torah reminds us that those laws that legislate our personal relationships also come from Sinai, just as the rituals and the ceremonies that are described in Perasha Yitro, which govern the relationship with God, are there. The message is for our generation, that we tend to interpret laws to accommodate our own needs and predictions. When it comes to morality, when it comes to honoring parents, when it comes to gossip, when it comes to inflicting when it comes to inflicting pain or injury, theft, all of these things can be manipulated to justify our own desires. No matter how selfish our behavior can be, we can find a rationale for our actions, or inactions, whatever it is. Now, I suspect that we all pride ourselves on being good people. We do what we can, and we try to forget that the Torah does not specifically command that we be good. The word tov, right, is too ambiguous. Right, the word good. Every culture, every society, even the most base of societies, right, has its own interpretation of what goodness is. Now, the definition of good is always changing, right? Look at this country. What was good 50 years ago, 20 years ago? It's not the same anymore. Very different. We've changed what the word good is. That which yesterday was termed good may no longer be considered to be good today, right? And that which in the past was regarded as evil and immoral can regrettably be viewed as good and moral today. But the goodness by which you and I live, which was legislated at Har Sinai, is rooted in eternity. It comes from God Himself, who created us, right? The Torah defines good and tells us how we have to interact with our relationships on a personal, intimate level, as well on a general interaction. Nothing is left to chance. Life is too precious. Life is too precious. Sorry about that. Life is too precious, and we can't afford to live life in error. Therefore, everything comes from Sinai, showing us how to live the most meaningful, profoundly good life. Many years ago, when in the world of traveling, when we were allowed to actually visit other countries, I was in Prague. And if you've been to Prague, Prague is a gorgeous city, a lot of Jewish influence in the city of Prague. There's a famous clock tower. And I remember someone in the group asked the tour guide, why are the clock towers, why do they put the clocks on the top of the city? So he said for two reasons. One is obvious that everyone could see it. And number two, he said the clocks were lower. People would come and adjust the time to fit their schedules. I'm not late, I'm on time, right? And I feel like that's true with morality as well. And what makes the Torah so profound, my grandmother passed away on Tuesday. She was buried on Wednesday, and she was the whole process of caring for her was so profound. She was buried in Israel, and my son, who's the only grandson or great grandson, and it's the only direct family member that was in Israel was my son, who happened to be in yeshiva. And he took care of the burial. He got 10 guys. They literally dug up the grave. They buried it. Here's a woman who knew nothing. She was, she had no connection to Judaism. She was, grew up in a family. She believed in God, but she really knew nothing. But she had a very deep affinity for what the Torah had. She had a lot of ideas and principles that were handed down to her through Mesorah, but she never had a real education. She didn't understand it. But there was still a baseline for her Jewish morality. That world of being able to pass down ethics and morality from the home is over. It doesn't work anymore. Whatever we think we can, pass down to our kids, it's no longer, whatever worked for us, it's not going to work for the next generation. This next generation needs instruction. And if we don't give them instruction, you look around you see what's happening today with morals and ethics, right? I don't have to explain it. I've spoken about it already. It's scary how fast it's changing. And what we think is going to be normal today is going to be not normal tomorrow, and vice versa. What's not normal today may become normal tomorrow. And therefore, what makes Jews so unique is that when we look at our moral standards, where we are today, I'm quite confident that it would look exactly the same way 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 and 2,000 years ago. You can't say that about anybody else. 2,000 years ago, if you were a Roman, you were slaughtering young babies because you gave birth to a baby girl first and you wanted a boy, or you thought the baby was a little deformed. You took it by its left leg and you crashed it on a rock, right? That's immoral. If you were living 2,500 years ago, you were living in Greece. I don't have to tell you what the Greeks were doing. If you were a Greek man and you were 45 years old and you didn't have a 13-year-old younger lover, you were a freak in that society, okay? The world has changed, there's no question about it. But the one constant has been Torah, ethics, and morality. It's always been the same. And it's been the same for generation to generation. There were slips and cracks, but we're here because of people who had this steadfast relationship to this Sinai event that transformed everything. Now, there's another dimension between Har Sinai and our civil laws, okay? The 10 Commandments, the Sefer Dibrot open with the words, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem, your God. By placing the laws of business ethics after the Ten Commandments, the Torah teaches us that he who is not ethical in business doesn't really trust God. Because if he believed in divine providence, he would understand that ultimately it is God who provides. It is he who determines our income. And therefore, it's futile to cheat, steal, and allow yourself to surrender to greed. Because in the end, it always catches up with us. You can't outsmart God. There's a system in place. Okay. Now, this connection, once again, reminds us that we have to do everything we can to adhere, uphold to our moral, ethical laws, not because they appeal to our intellect, but because they're legislated by God and guide our behavior in the workplace as well as in the synagogue. This is the reason that we don't forget that the beginning of wisdom is fear Hashem. Reshit chokhmah yirat Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is fear of God. If we lack that awe, if we lack that awareness, all our wisdom, all of our morals, all of the ethics that we have can be easily twisted and corrupted and rationalized to justify the most horrific of evils. Just consider the evil that continues to plague our civilization. Think about how much evil we have today in a civilized and enlightened 20th and 21st century, right? The Torah gives us a mandate to strive to emulate God and live by his commandments. Even as God is compassionate, we have to strive to be more compassionate. Even as God is forgiving, we have to strive to be more forgiving. Our ethics, our morals are all from Hashem. It can't be a subjective moral ethical principle. And therefore, it's immutable. It's non-negotiable. How lucky are we that God blessed us to have laws that guarantee the integrity of our human interactions. And what pity it would be to be unaware of that gift. How many people are just completely not connected to these ideas? And I think that this teaching is reinforced throughout the whole entire Torah. So it says the 10 commandments are engraved on 2 tablets, right? One for establishing the relation between man and God. The first 5 of the Sefer Dibrot are between Ben Adam Lamakom, between God and man's relationship. And the next 2 are between Ben Adam L'Chaver, between man and man, okay? The 2 tablets remind us that both relationships are holy, right? It's also for that reason that during the revelation that God pronounced all 10 commandments simultaneously, because they're all equally holy. So it'll be clear that no one commandment takes precedence over another. You can't say that one of the halachot is more important than the other. There's a special section in the Mishnah called Perkei Avot, right? The ethics of our fathers, and it deals with human relationships. But significantly, right? It starts with the words Moshe kibel Torah meSinai, that Moshe received the laws from Sinai. Okay. In a world where ethics and values and morals seem to have lost their meaning, how powerful is it for us to know that our Torah is anchored in timeless truths? Even on the most simple elementary level, 21st century man has yet to accept you shall not kill. From Hitler to Arafat to bin Laden to the Ayatollah Khomeini and those crazies in Iran or Hezbollah, wherever it is, it's obvious how desperately man needs God to regulate his behavior. And I believe that's what this parasha is. It's a lot of laws, a lot of this, a lot of that, not an accident. And I just want to segue quickly into the month of Adar. We know that Mishanichnas Adar Marba B'Simcha, we're supposed to increase our joy. Now, question is like this: why? What does it mean to increase our joy? So on Wednesdays, the last 2 weeks, we've been talking a little bit about what happiness is. And what we define happiness is the awareness that I am doing what I'm meant to be doing. That's how we define happiness. Happiness is not just a feeling of feeling good. Happiness is the knowledge that I'm doing exactly what I should be doing. So if that is the definition of simcha, we say mishenichnas adar marbim besimcha. Right now, you open up the Megillah, we say the following: we say La Yehudim hayta ora vesimcha, and for the Jews they had light and simcha. What are they talking about over there? Okay, so we know the following. Okay, just follow me for a moment. The Jews receive the Torah. They have this profound moment with God. He's holding up the mountain, the Midrash says. And he tells the Jewish people, if you don't accept the Torah, sham tieh kvuratam, this is going to be your burial place. This is it. If you don't accept the Torah, it's over for you. You got to accept it no matter what. So the Jews realized that they accepted the Torah. They had no choice. It was like God holding a gun to their head. The Jews accept the Torah, no choice again, and they move into the land of Israel. They move into the land of Israel, and they end up in Joshua brings them in, and a couple hundred years later, they get King David, and he has a son named Solomon. They build the first temple. First temple is around for about another 400 years, and you have about a 900-year history of Jews living in Israel, serving God, being Jewish. It's all good. And then the Babylonians come and they destroy everything. Gone. Now, if you were living in Israel during that exile, right, and you watched the temple being destroyed, you saw your homes being burnt, you saw everything that we did, everything that we read in this book, in the Chumash, everything that we read in the Chumash, everything that we read the Chumash and we read all these stories and we're talking and learning about and educating ourselves, and you're like, dude, it's over. God just destroyed everything. Just be there for a moment. Forget about the rest of history. At that moment, it's like it's over. Right? So it makes sense when you open up the book of Esther and you read how the Jewish people were involved in one of the most sensual parties that ever existed. Take your imagination and think about like the craziest party ever. Now, okay, 10x that, that's what was going on in Achashverosh's party. Okay. It was worse than whatever you could imagine. And everyone was there and the Jews were there. And the question is, how could they get there? So on one level, they're like, well, God abandoned us. The second level is like, well, we really never had to go ahead and accept the Torah because God forced us. He forced us. We don't have to accept it. So what happens at the end of the story, there's this decree that Haman wants to create a day where you could kill a Jew. How do you kill all Jews in one day? You make a law that says every single citizen of the country can pick a sword and kill a Jew day. And that's you kill everybody at once. This decree is annulled. And the Jews fight back, a small little war, and they reclaim their belief. Kimu v'kiblu, those words, kimu v'kiblu, what did they get up and receive? They re-accepted, they rededicated themselves to their development and growth. They rededicated themselves to the idea that maybe God accepted us before because we needed it, but now 1,000 years of history of building the land of Israel, of being exiled, of almost being wiped out, we recognize that everything God did was out of love for us. And therefore the Torah, as hard as it was in ancient times, because today we don't realize how much of our society has the Jewish principles baked into it, right? But if you were living 2,500 years ago in Babylonia and Persia, being Jewish was a very foreign idea. One God, one wife, a very monogamous relationships, and there was responsibilities and laws and rules. Like, why would you want to do all that stuff? You're crazy. So Jews rationalized and said, I don't need to do it. God forced me. But now, kimu v'kiblu, they got up, they reaccepted it. They said, this is for us. What is simcha? What is the happiness that we're supposed to add in the month of Adar? It's not going out and drinking. It's not about going out and partying, while you should do those things too. But first, ask yourself, what does it mean to be the best version of me? And then ask yourself, what am I doing to become that version of me? How am I developing my spirituality? Real happiness is not rooted in material things. Real happiness is rooted in the spiritual things we're meant to be accomplishing in this world, becoming more patient, more loving, more caring, maybe making brachot for wherever you are. It might be putting on tefillin. It might be keeping Shabbat more profoundly. Whatever it is, every single one of us has something we need to work on, whether it's understanding higher truths, whether it's the simple interaction between man and man. That's what this month is about. And I'll prove it to you. What is the main mitzvah of Purim? There's two of them. One is reading the Megillah, being informed about this idea. And the second is shalach manot, mishalach manot. What are you supposed to do with shalach manot? You're supposed to give a basket of food to somebody, ideally someone who you haven't spoken to in a while, ideally someone who struggled with, because ultimately our interpersonal relationships is what allows us to find God in the world. I can't do it alone. I could only do it with you. How do I achieve simcha? How do I achieve my happiness? I achieve it when I work in tandem with you. I achieve it when I'm able to bring you along with me for the ride. I achieve it when I'm able to overcome my own selfish, narcissistic view of life and able to expand that view to include the needs and the wants of the people around me. That's what these civil laws are about. That's what Mishpatim is about. That's what this month is about. Not just, oh, it's this Torah, all the things. It's about together, me, you, working on thinking about how we could make the world a greater place. I'll end with the following. Those of you that know me know that I love technology. And, there was in 2015, Google was writing these artificial intelligence programs. And the hardest part of writing AI is giving it the ability to learn on its own. Like the Siri and the, Hey Googles that we're using today are really just, they're hearing the command and then they're repeating back a list of answers. They're not really thinking, but they actually created a program that actually thinks. It was self-learning. And it wasn't being fed answers. You could ask it real questions and it would give its own answer based on the books and the movies that it read and so on and so forth. So they asked this artificial intelligence, what is the purpose of life? And you know what this AI said? The purpose of life is to serve the greater good, right? Beautiful. They also asked it, what do you think about having children? And AI said that having children is immoral. And they shut the program off and started freaking him out. It was going to very dark places. But I think that's so true. If you could summarize what we're meant to be doing here, we're meant to be in service of the greater good. The artificial intelligence was almost right. We're here to be in service of the greater good. How do I get there? It can't just be whatever I think in my imagination. I need help from an outside source. That outside source is the infinite. My question for you is, what are you doing to connect to the infinite? But more importantly, what are you trying to do to bring out the infinite within you? Wishing you a Shabbat Shalom, a Chodesh Tov, Mishenichnas Adar, Marbim B'Simcha. We should all have that real happiness, that ability to actualize our inner potential, see growth in one another, and laugh together, God willing, soon in Jerusalem. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
My pleasure. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Thank you. Great class.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Alana. Take care. Nice seeing you, Daniel. Thanks, Leah. Shabbat Shalom.